The year is 1921, and this country, Northern Ireland, has officially been formed separate from their southern neighbours here, Ireland. After thousands of years of proud Irish history and centuries of resistance against the British, the island officially became divided, mostly due to those living in this small province known as Ulster. Fast forward to 2024, and an agreement might be back on the table to unite the Emerald Isle once again. How did Ireland become so divided to begin with? And why now, after 100 years apart, are the Irish considering reuniting? This video will answer these questions and more as we break down Ireland's politics, its long and complicated history with Britain, and discuss the likelihood of reunification. Please consider subscribing if you like this video, and let's head on over to the Emerald Isle. In 1921, after over a century of union with Britain, the majority of Ireland decided to finally declare independence, achieving the freedom to govern themselves, known as Home Rule. But as it turned out, not all Irish wanted to be independent. This portion of the country, located within the province of Ulster, rejected Irish independence, preferring to remain a part of the British Empire. And so, Northern Ireland was born. The division was not only geographic but also religious in nature, with the Protestant Unionists remaining loyal to Britain, while the majority Catholic Republicans instead fought against English rule. With that, everyone assumed the Irish question to be settled. However, with the UK's decision to Brexit from the European Union, questions of Irish reunification have come bubbling back to light in Irish society. To understand this delicate relationship, we first have to take a look at the long history of British rule in Ireland. British presence in Ireland dates back over 850 years to a 12th century event known as the Anglo-Norman invasion. A group of Anglo-Normans, mainly coming from here in southern Wales, began conquering various areas of Ireland in 1169. This little field trip over to Ireland was in fact sponsored by the Pope at the time, Adrian IV. Unsurprisingly, this Adrian was English himself, the only Englishman to ever serve as Pope. By passing a law known as the Laudabilita, Pope Adrian IV established the right for King Henry II of England to invade Ireland and establish both political and religious rule there. According to this papal bull, all the land conquered by the Anglo-Norman invaders now belonged to the English monarchy. And so, British rule was established in Ireland and would continue in various forms for over 700 years, and even longer in Northern Ireland. For the next 400 years, the English monarchy ruled Ireland as a lordship. The Normans living around what is now the city of Dublin were constantly clashing with the native Gaelic peoples during this time, and Irish resistance against the British presence would not be stopping anytime soon. Then came England's infamous King Henry VIII, who famously broke ties with the Pope in Rome and transformed England into a Protestant country. Keep in mind that Ireland had been devoutly Catholic since the 5th century and already resented the English presence in their land long before religion came into the equation. In 1536, King Henry VIII launched a reconquest of Ireland to bring the rebellious territory under his control, which was ultimately successful. In 1541, Henry officially declared Ireland a kingdom, meaning that he was now King of Ireland too. This so-called Tudor conquest of Ireland involved many attempts to convert the Catholic Irish majority to Protestantism. Despite the brutality of the English efforts, the Irish would not be converted, introducing a religious divide between the two groups in the country, which was now entirely under English rule. Over the following century, England began slowly stripping away Ireland's autonomy. They forbid them from holding parliament without British permission, and to make matters worse, began passing anti-Catholic laws, making the divide between Irish Catholic and English Protestant citizens even bigger. This led to the Irish Rebellion of 1641. Irish Catholics revolted against the Protestant settlers living here in Ulster Plantation, the area which would one day become Northern Ireland. The rebellion resulted in the deaths of over 12,000 Ulster Protestants and prompted an 11-year war between Catholics and Protestants. In 1649, Oliver Cromwell decided to intervene with his own invasion of Ireland. Land seized by Cromwell was seized from Catholics and given to loyal British supporters. which, as you can imagine, only added to the abundant anti-British sentiments. It didn't take long for this anti-Catholic reform to escalate into full-blown legal discrimination. The penal laws passed during this period took Catholic subjugation to a new level, stopping Irish Catholics from accessing education, voting in elections for Parliament, and even speaking in Gaelic or listening to Irish music. The purpose was to, quote, prevent the further growth of Catholicism in Ireland, also known as popery. The laws were eventually appealed due to pressures from Catholic powers such as France, but the discrimination against Catholics continued in other forms. Irish Catholics eventually grew frustrated with the repression of Catholicism and the concentration of power in the hands of the Anglo-Irish Protestant minority. The building tensions eventually exploded into the Irish Rebellion of 1798, a rebellion where the Irish themselves were divided into two clear sides. On one side were the United Irishmen, who were fighting for a democratic united Ireland free of British control, and on the other side, in Britain's corner, were the loyal Unionists, who were majority Protestant and in favour of British rule. As it turns out, the Irish had someone in their corner too, the ever-proud French Catholics. French forces invaded Ireland in hopes of supporting the Catholic majority against the Protestant English forces, but it was too late. In the end, the Catholic forces were again beat out by the British. As a response to the successfully squashed rebellion, Britain passed the infamous Acts of Union in 1800, which officially brought the two nations into a single country, now known as the United Kingdom of Great Britain and Ireland, merging their parliaments into one governing body. The next 120 years in Ireland would be full of rebellion and resistance in an effort to undo the Acts of Union and achieve the dream of Home Rule, or the right of the Irish to govern themselves and be free of Britain's control. However, not all Irish dreamt of independence, and the division among the Irish people would become far more than a physical boundary over the course of the 20th century. The boundary line between Ireland and Northern Ireland lies here in Ulster Province. It is the citizens of Ulster that differ from the rest of Ireland in their opinion of the British, and also in their religion. So why is this group so different from the rest of the Irish? Well, as you might have guessed, it all comes back to the British. That is, these people are British, or at least they were. What is now Ulster Province began here as Ulster Plantation back in the early 17th century. During this time, settlers from England and Scotland began immigrating to the north of Ireland, where British presence was being rejected by the native Gaelic Catholics. The goal of the plantation was to establish a population of Protestants in Ulster who could civilise the native Gaels by making the region more English and, therefore, easier to control. After less than 30 years, there were 50,000 Protestant settlers in Ulster, many of whom were living on land stolen from Catholics. Today, much of the population living in Ulster are descended from those early Protestant settlers or from Scottish Protestants who immigrated to the region. Over the years, the Ulster Protestants maintained their English loyalty just as they maintained their English identity. In 1920, Ireland was partitioned into two sections. This area here became Southern Ireland, made up of 32 Catholic majority counties. The rest of the island up here became known as Northern Ireland, a section of 6 counties with a Protestant majority. 2 years later, following the end of the Irish War for Independence, Southern Ireland decided to officially leave the UK and establish themselves as the Free Irish State, finally achieving their goal of Home Rule. It was hardly a surprise when Northern Ireland didn't follow suit. The majority Protestant area decided to form their own region made up of 6 counties, governing themselves with their own parliament and government. And so, Northern Ireland was born. But it was hardly the end of the conflict. The extensive conflict in Ireland during the 20th century could easily be the subject of its own video, but we'll try and keep it short and sweet to explain how we've reached the possibility of Irish reunion today. When Ireland was partitioned back in 1920, it was always expected that reunification would eventually occur. A united Ireland is one of the main goals of the Republican Party of Ireland, who claim that British rule on any part of the island is illegitimate. From the 1960s to the 1990s, a Republican paramilitary group known as the Irish Republican Army, or IRA, fought in the name of reunification. This 30-year conflict was known as the Troubles. Although the Troubles were not religious in nature, the two sides were divided by religion. since most Republicans in favour of reunification were Irish Catholics and most Unionists were Ulster Protestants who wanted to remain in the UK. The fighting was resolved by the 1998 Good Friday Agreement, which recognised that the goal of United Ireland was a legitimate one, but that it must be done with the consent of the people of Northern Ireland rather than by force. 26 years after the Good Friday Agreement, it seems that Northern Ireland is once again considering reunification. Why now? A large part of the answer to this question comes down to Brexit. In 2016, the United Kingdom voted in a referendum to leave the European Union. Even though Northern Ireland and Scotland both voted to remain in the EU, the majority of the UK voted in favour of leaving. Because Ireland is still part of the EU, Brexit has caused some serious issues for the island. This meant border controls between the two countries, as well as Northern Ireland no longer being a part of the EU single market, dividing the island economically. Since Brexit, citizens of Northern Ireland have called into question whether staying in the UK is the best option for their country. Although it might be a better option economically to join Ireland, the choice to stand by UK membership seems to come down to a question of identity. The Northern Irish are adamant about maintaining their English ties, in the same way that Brits were adamant about reinforcing their British identity by leaving the EU. The Protestant population stands strongly in support of the UK, and yet a reunion referendum is still a likely option in the near future. But how exactly is this the case? Let's take a look at what the data says about the demographics and opinions in Northern Ireland. According to the 1998 Good Friday Agreement, reunification would require the consent of a majority of Northern Ireland. In other words, the only way to a united Ireland is through a referendum, known as a border poll, in which a majority of the population in both countries votes in favour of uniting. The decision would be up to Northern Ireland's Secretary of State to call for a referendum when they believe a majority would likely vote in favour of reunion. Calls for a referendum have increased dramatically since Brexit, since a reunion would mean significant economic benefits, including easy access to industry across the island. So if there were a referendum, how would Northern Ireland vote? One of the clearest signs that Northern Ireland might be open to reunification is the recent rise in support of the Sinn Féin party, a political group committed to Irish nationalism and reunification. The past 2 years has seen Sinn Féin elected to power in an unprecedented way, and in February of this year, Michelle O'Neill became the country's first nationalist First Minister. This shift in political opinion has to do with demographic changes in the country. For the first time ever, as of 2022, Northern Ireland has more Catholics than Protestants. At the time of Irish partition, Northern Ireland had a roughly 2-to-1 ratio of Protestants to Catholics. Today, 46% of the country identifies as Catholic versus only 44% Protestant. And yet, the polls don't indicate that this will directly translate to a vote for reunion. Poll data published from February of this year shows that 49% of Northern Ireland would still vote to stay in the UK. But with 11% of those polled claiming they were unsure of their choice, it's hard to tell exactly how the vote would turn out. Although poll data suggests that the Irish Union might not be formed in the next year or so, the future still seems bright for the hopes of Irish nationalists. Data shows a clear trend away from unionism in the younger generations, with citizens under 45 making up the largest demographic of reunion supporters in the country. If Northern Ireland did vote for reunion in the future, it would likely still mean the continuation of their own devolved government, and even some continued British cooperation, likely for the sake of the unionists in the country. So, will we live to see the dream of Irish reunification come true? The truth is, this seems to be at least several years away, but the path towards a united Ireland has never been more clear or more likely than now. If you enjoyed this video, please click here to watch another video.